There's been a lot of that sediment material basically bulldozed up from the original procession of that glacier before it retreated within that ice. So there's boulders and all sorts of things coming out of this. Well, often when ice melts, it cracks or fissures, and you can have large chunks of ice falling off. It's basically what happened here. So as that's retreating, that ice would break apart, and large chunks of it would remain in place while the rest of the glacier continued to retreat to the north. With all that outwash and all that sediment, that large block of ice was going to be covered with that sediment. All that weight is pressing down on the ground underneath us and creating a depression, and that's what we call basically a kettle hole. That would fill with the melted glacial water, and you have a kettle hole lake. That's basically the first stage of bog formation. So you have an open water lake, more or less. Now what happens after that is very neat. A lot of the sediments that were left behind contain seed banks of northern climate species, boreal species, that you'll see very common up in Canada, but not so common down here. Well, those plant species would begin to colonize and germinate and grow. And most of the growing took place obviously along the shoreline or the edge of this kettle hole lake. Well, over time, natural succession occurs. And natural succession is a scientific terminology for change over time, basically. And succession happens anywhere. You can have succession in an old farm field. You can have a succession in a pond. You can have succession anywhere. Well, in a kettle hole lake, when succession starts, you start to get plants growing around the edge of this kettle hole lake. And eventually they build up and they grow in and they creep in and they start filling in the body of water until it basically comes together on top, creating a floating mat of vegetation. And that's what we're standing on right now. There's no more open water really left in the Kent Bog. It's more or less grown together. Now there's still pockets of water underneath us. And if you get out into some of the open areas and you kind of bounce around, you'll feel we're almost like on a trampoline or a sponge. And that's just that mat that's grown in. There's different types of bogs. This one is kind of grown in, and it's a tamarack bog. You can see succession's really taken over. We have shrubs and trees and so on. Other bogs still have open water. About 5 or 6 miles to the east of here is Triangle Lake Bog, another state nature preserve. It's an open water bog, so it still has open water. Succession hasn't crowded in and created that sedge mat yet. If you go to Canada, you'll see all sorts of different bogs. They have spruce bogs up there where the dominant species are red and black spruce. Here the dominant species are blueberry and tamarack.